Good morning, beautiful people. Kit Cummings right here on 40 for 40. We're doing 40 sermons in 40 days. Today is day 35. Thanks so much for tuning in. It's been very encouraging as we go through a time that we have never been through together. And so many of you guys have been jumping on every day. It's very, very much encouragement that we need. We got to spread the love. People need a lot of hope right now. Today I want to talk about who you hang with. You know, if you look at the people somebody hangs with, you can tell a lot about them. It also affects who we become. You think about teenagers. We tell them to choose their friends carefully, because you're going to become like those you hang out with. I mean, it's an energy principle. There's science behind it. Bad company corrupts good character. We worry about our kids and who they're choosing to, do life with. And if you can remember when you were young, you might have gotten a friend that you didn't have and your life began to change. Or maybe you fell in love and all of a sudden your life began to change. Maybe you moved schools and got a new crew and your life began to change. But the same with grown folks. You move to another town and get a new, clan, and that changes you, or a new job, a new profession. All of a sudden you've got new peers and coworkers, and it begins to affect who we are and who we become. And, you've heard birds of a feather flock together. Think about it, the people you know. Rich people, they tend to hang with rich people. Poor people with poor people. Spiritual people tend to gravitate and attract spiritual people. Criminals hang out with criminals. Bullies have a bunch of friends that are bullies. And people that kind of are mavericks, and man, I don't have a clique. I just do my own thing. I'm a rebel. Well, they tend to find a whole bunch of other mavericks and rebels, and then there's a little clique again. So we are built to live in community, but we get to choose who our weird little group is, and we start doing life. We also have our family. You don't choose your family. You are who you are, where you are, and who you got. And right now, man, we're spending a lot of time with family, whoever you're quarantined with. Reached out to one of my football coaches this morning, see if I could help. And he said, I am spending more time with my family than I ever have. He said, it's been wonderful. Coaches work a lot of hours, and to be able to have that time. So this thing is doing different things for different people. But today I want to look at who Jesus hung with. I'm talking about when he just wanted to kick it. He just wanted to relax. He wanted to just have that special time. I don't know that we see that Jesus in the scriptures. We see the stories, and we see the lonely Jesus. We see the suffering Jesus. We see the revolutionary Jesus. We see the teacher, and he's always the one that's teaching, but we don't get to see just the day-to-day, walking along the road, hanging out by the lake, eating together late at night. We don't get to see the casual Jesus. What he was like when he was completely just relaxed, and I guess he always was. I mean, he is the Prince of Peace. But I'm talking about when he just got some free time. There had to be a Jesus that we don't see that was recreational. I bet he laughed loud. I bet he danced funny. I bet he told jokes. I bet he was a prankster. He said we got to become like kids. Well, think about kids. They loved him because he was playful. His energy was joyful. I would have loved to see some of the tricks or jokes that he played on the 12. He must have just been just a ham sometimes. And we don't see that. But everybody wanted Jesus to be what they wanted him to be, which was the Messiah, the King, the Savior, the warrior. I mean, they had dreamed and prayed and prophesied about this Messiah, Emmanuel, who would come and set God's people free. But he didn't come in the package that they expected. And he was scandalized because of who he kept company with. And the tribe that he built around him is not something that some business coach executive would have told him to construct if he was trying to build an empire, to build a company, an organization, a team that would change the world. They certainly would not have advised or consulted Jesus to do it the way he did. He chose prostitutes. He chose tax collectors. He chose dangerous revolutionaries. He had a couple of Pharisees who were his friends, which to the other side was scandalous. He touched lepers, and nobody did that. He challenged the rich, and he embraced the poor. And he was this light to a dark world, And he did not fit into that religious box that all of them were being controlled by. And he broke all the rules. But really, a lot of the problems that Jesus had in his life and that would cause his end was they didn't like who he hung with. And so today, I get to preach about this beautiful subject that is so close to my heart, and it's Jesus and the least of these. I'm going to read a famous passage about the sheep and the goats. Now, I got to be honest right here. This has always been one of my favorite passages, and I've preached a whole bunch of sermons on the sheep and the goats. Man, I could preach it hard. I could get people convicted if they're living like goats. I could try to get people to be like the sheep. Man, I could get you to laugh, cry, goosebumps, get out there and serve the poor. But if you'd have looked at my life 24/7, and I was a full-time preacher, you wouldn't have seen a lot of sheep work. Maybe I was a goat that was masquerading. I didn't mean to. It's just that I get caught up in the day-to-day. You know, you hang who you hang with. You do what other people around you do. You kind of have the same expectations of those that you're closest to. And we become the collective average of the people we hang out with the most. And now all of a sudden we can have a church where everybody looks the same. You know, everybody kind of the same economic class, maybe the same color skin, maybe the same part of town. And that's our little fishing pond. And we can miss this powerful and really challenging passage. As you go through and look at the stories that Jesus told and the sermons he preached and his lessons, very rarely did he talk about judgment. You know, he came to seek and save. He didn't come to judge. He came to sacrifice himself, not to judge. And so when he does talk about judgment, man, it's a sacred space. And that's what I'm going to look at today. It's called The Sheep and the Goats. It comes out of Matthew 26. It says, he is speaking, he says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his throne in heavenly glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He'll put the sheep on his right, the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. You know, Jesus, he's preaching, and then he gets into some really serious territory. He says, when the Son of Man comes, I'm going to go away. But when I come back as the shepherd on the throne, he's going to separate sheep and goats. And we know what side we want to be on. And he says, just like a shepherd has to separate and keep the flock all together and protected from the wolves, and to make sure the goats aren't mixed with the sheep, the goats all have to be over here. They're different than the sheep. And it says he's going to separate them. People are already separated. I mean, we're separating ourselves before the shepherd comes. It's the haves and the have-nots. Those that have in this world and run things, and those that don't have. And they are the subjects. And so the sheep and the goats, now everybody that haves, the haves, are not necessarily goats. And all that don't have aren't necessarily sheep. But he said, this is going to be one of the things that really sets us apart, is how did you treat the least of these? And here's how he spells it out. He says, the hungry, you gave me something to eat. The thirsty, oh, you gave me something to drink. I was parched. The naked, I was cold. You gave me clothes. I was a stranger, didn't know anybody. You invited me in. I was sick and hurting, and you came and looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And then all the people, the sheep, are going to be like, when did we ever, Jesus, we didn't see you hungry. You fed 5,000. We never saw you thirsty. You're the living water. We certainly never saw you sick. You are health. We never saw you naked, and we never saw you a stranger. The whole world loves you, Jesus. You're a rock star, and we certainly never saw you in prison. This is before he would go and face his trial. He said, whatever you did for the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Now, is he saying, it's kind of like when you help somebody like that, one of those people, that, it's kind of like you're doing something for me. You're bearing my name, you're a Christian, so you give a few bucks to a homeless guy, you're doing that for me, because that could be me. I took it literally and I said, man, Jesus is saying, you want to know where I'm at? I will be with the least of these. And he talked about them. He said, the last shall be first. The ones at the very end of the line. You think about in this world of 7.5 billion people, the people at the very end of the line are the ones that we often disregard, marginalize, and sometimes drive away into certain parts of areas where we don't go. And that is where Jesus said, I will be. He said, he promised us two different things. If you follow me, I will walk with you and I'll be with you all the way. You want to find me? I'll be with those that are really walking like me. And he said, if you can't find me there, then go look at the least of these. I'll be hanging out with them. And if you think about it, that's how he spent his time on the planet. Man, he went to the cover colonnade where all the paralyzed people, disabled people used to lay. He went to the lepers, the untouchables. He was scandalized because a prostitute touched him. And she was untouchable. Man, she's a sinner. She's unclean. He hung out with these hated people, the hated, the feared, the forgotten, the marginalized. And it seems like maybe he did it just because he felt sorry for them, he preached about them. The meek, they're going to get the earth. The hungry, the thirsty, those who desire righteousness, those that are humbled and broken. And he's talking about these brothers of his. But why do you think that he hung so easily and naturally with those that he would call the least of these? It's because they were his people. Nazareth was a tiny little country town that nobody even noticed. There was about 300 to 400 people. And it was this tiny little place of about 10 acres. Think about that. In your neighborhood, if there's a little 10-acre slot, which is about, 4, 5, 6 houses, a little cluster of houses, that was Nazareth. And everybody knew everybody. A small town, word travels fast, everybody knows everybody raises everybody's kids. They were poor, they were just farmers. It was a little farming town that was not too far from the Sea of Galilee. And so this is where Jesus grew up. We would call, let's just say it, here we'd say, oh, that's white trash. Now, hopefully you never used that word, but you've heard it. Yeah, those are, trailer trash, whatever it is. Jesus came from those people. When they went to the temple to make their sacrifice, they had to offer pigeons because his family was very, very poor. They couldn't offer the lamb or the goat or the heifer. They had to offer a poor people's sacrifice, but they did. It was a very conservative little town. So when Jesus started his ministry into the big city, the metropolitan area, the holy city of God, the most famous city on the planet, so much history, he came as a country bumpkin that was used to hanging with just real people. You see, my whole game changed when I prayed a prayer in brokenness. And it was a sad prayer, man. It was like 2004, and I had fallen out. And a lot of it, my isolation was mostly my fault. I ran away. But it was a lonely time. The phone stopped ringing. I was hurting. Addiction had me. And I thought I was done. And I prayed a prayer. And I said, God, if you ever see fit to let me preach again, which I thought was not very much of a possibility, I said, I'll go to the harass and helpless. I'll go to sheep and goats. I'll do that thing. I preached a lot, but just maybe they'll let me preach. Because I didn't feel like I was qualified anymore. And a lot of people in Atlanta didn't feel like I was either. And so I'd blown my chance. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. And so I thought, well, maybe I can get a new congregation. Give me the least of these. But I'll be quite honest. I forgot about it. That was like 2004 or 5. Several years went by. And I was trying to preach again. I was a motivational speaker. So I was like, they'll be my congregation. Ain't nobody looking for a drunken fallen preacher. And so that wasn't doing it for me. And then a young man came into my life who was a kingdom kid that had grown up, gotten the gang life, become somebody, was facing a serious murder charge and needed me. And that started my ride. I call him Luis. Young Hispanic brother in a gang with some power changed my life. And when I saw him baptized on Cinco de Mayo 2010, man, that launched me in this least of these ministry. And it took me to third world countries, and I was embraced by minorities, and I got to hang with just real people. And over that time, I got hooked on real. Man, church got boring because I was so fired up to be in those prisons or on the streets or with those beautiful at-risk kids. And I began to see God, and I'd go to church, and I love church. I still go to church. We're committed to our church. But man, it didn't light me up like it did with the least of these. And so I wondered, okay, Jesus came from that. It was where he was comfortable, poor people. But he also came to seek and save what was lost, and he was a voice for the voiceless, and he was a protector of the weak and defender of the elderly and the sick. And so it was so much his heart. But I thought, maybe, well, I don't know, maybe he pitied them. He felt sorry for them because they didn't have. And I don't know if that's true. And I think maybe if we do things for the least of these, anybody that goes out and serves at a homeless shelter or feeds the poor or goes in a clothing drive for the kids that can't afford, all these things are beautiful things. And God bless you. I admire you. I respect you if you do those things. Anybody that does it. But do we do it out of pity? You know, I found secrets among the least of these, and they became my friends. I'm talking about in poor places, poor parts of Tijuana, tough parts of Michigan, deep in Angola State Prison, all across in India where there was beautiful, colorful poverty. Man, I found these people. And so I started thinking, what do they have that Jesus valued? And what did I learn in all these years riding with the least of these? One, they're not boring. People that we look at as lower class citizens, they are a blast. They're hilarious. I mean, they're just more real than a lot of the people up here in the nice areas are. And that's just my perspective. If this ain't hit anybody else, that's fine. But for me, they're so much more fun. They're real. I mean, their laughter is loud. They cut up on each other. They'll get into fights and then just leave it alone. They don't carry that grudge. I thought of the things. They're more honest. You ask them a question, they will tell you the truth. They're not so concerned about image because it's like, hey, we're all in this thing together. And so they tend to be more, and when I say they, I'm talking about these beautiful people that Jesus would call the least of these. Hungry, thirsty, naked, sick, stranger, prisoner. The ones we marginalize and disregard and discard into these areas that we don't go. Honesty. I see so much more honesty, just real vulnerability. I also see a toughness that I admire. Man, they are tough as nails. Man, they go to funerals all the time. In very, very poor areas, tough areas, dangerous areas. God bless that single mom, that praying grandma. These young folks that are in so much danger. It's a toughness. And during this virus pandemic, man, poor people, tougher. It's scary because they don't have the health care that we have. They don't have the resources. But I see a toughness that I want to imitate. I see a loyalty. Man, they're loyal to one another. They might fight like cats and dogs. But if somebody comes after theirs, they'll fight. I mean, they're loyal. I learned that in prisons. Man, this is a loyal, tough, very honest. I mean, I'm telling you, a lot of these guys, we would think, a bunch of liars. No, I see more liars in the free world than I do behind the razor wire. Joyful. They value relationships. So much more human connection. Yeah, everybody's got devices, but not everybody's sitting around on them. It's people out on the porch. It's people out in the neighborhoods. It's kids hanging out. Maybe they're not doing the best things, but they're hanging out, face to face. It's a cultural, man, if you see my kid acting a fool, snatch him up. It's that kind of thing. Much different out here in the upper class free world. Different rules. Their word is their bond. Respect is everything. If you give your word in a prison and you go back on it, you got problems. If you say you're going to be there and you're not there, loyalty, you've got problems. Man, if you disrespect somebody, you've got real problems. Out here in the free world, man, if I disrespect somebody, maybe they just don't like me anymore. Man, if I say I'm going to be somewhere and don't show up, don't bother to call, maybe I lost a friend. You know, if I disrespect somebody, or if I say I'm going to do something and don't do it, and maybe get a bad reputation, but nobody's going to come and see me. These are the street codes that really I admired. Are our kids learning these things? Are they just growing up in our homes on their devices and not learning about what does your word mean? Are you loyal to your friends? Man, are you spending FaceTime and playing together instead of just looking at that screen? Man, are kids laughing loud at things that really make them feel good? They saved me, the least of these. I made that promise, and then God took me on a ride. I'll close out with this. Roots, he hadn't said hey in a little while. So, another prison story. This is in the tough prison where our thing started. And as it started building momentum, and there was a word that spread through this dangerous prison that there was this thing called Peace at Hayes. And they gave us the visitation, and we would pour into there on Fridays. And this was like black, white, and brown, Christian, Muslim, Jew, Crips, Bloods, GDs, Latin Kings, Aryan Brotherhood. I mean, just like, boom, all in the same room, big crowd, and it was wild. And there was a lot of things in there. I got hooked on real. But there was a number of guys that we couldn't come to anything. Some of them would, and these are the real heavy guys. The guys that are hated, feared, and they ain't forgotten. They're on front, but they don't come to programs. They don't come to church. A lot of times they're not just hanging out in the general population. They're running things. And we knew there's no way we were going to bring peace to this prison if we didn't get those guys. So we sent people to the heavies and said, we request the presence, the honor of your presence. And this is how I'd send him. I'd say, bro, I need you to go and talk to this guy, Chain Gang. And that was really his name. He ran things in one organization. And I said, tell him, and I quote, that we request the honor of his presence at our next meeting. And we planned a special group just for them in the small chapel. And so on a Friday, we got these bad guys. They're all rivals in a small chapel. And we had convinced the warden to let us fry fish. And so there was a fish fry, which they had never done before. And Gary Burke, who can cook some fish, he made a meal. We had cheesecake, but here was the kicker. Gary had a good friend who became a friend of mine too. His name's Will B. And his group is called Black Violin. You ought to look it up. Man, YouTube Black Violin, rock star, been around the world. But he plays a violin. It's a hip-hop violin. It's beautiful. And we asked him if he would come. And I want you to imagine a bunch of hated, dangerous men in a small chapel wondering why they're there. And all of a sudden, fried fish is brought in with all the fixings. And then we introduce him to this world-known artist. And Will B breaks out his violin and does a special private concert for the least of these. And it was magic. They couldn't hate each other in that space. Their bellies were filled. The music was electric. And I looked around and they were staring at this man while they fed themselves. How are they going to hate when they just got treated like kings? The word got out. How come they got invited? How come we didn't get invited? Well, Jesus said when you throw a party, don't invite all your friends. Go out into the streets. You bring the beggars and the thieves. We're going to fill my Father's house. And so we had a beggar's banquet, and the movement began to move because these brothers now saw something of value that they really, really wanted. Do you want to connect with Jesus today? I mean, in a very special way. Serve the unlovable with no agenda. Don't just throw a couple dollars. Look somebody in the eye and say, I love you, man. What's your name? You know, help someone. It doesn't have to be a homeless or a gangster. It could just be a beautiful woman in your neighborhood that's elderly and quarantined all by herself. And you could take a meal and put it on her step and knock the door and run. No agenda. Don't get any praise. Just hanging with Jesus people. Real people. Simple people. Poor people. Poor people are rich. So much more. Some people are so rich, that's the only thing they have. And it's not the same as joy. Let's remember the least of these, but let's get a heart to care about not just the ones that look like us, vote like us, go to church like us, have the same economic level as us, same neighborhood as us, same gated community. How about those that Jesus would be hanging with? Because today, if he came back just like this, he would go to the same people. He'd go to the least of these, and then he would gather a movement, and then he would start preaching to the ones that have, surrounded by the have-nots. Love you. This day 35. Tune in tomorrow, 9 a.m. Always here for you. I'm excited. Love you. Pray for all of us. Be the peace you wish to see in the world.